You are now listening to Halal Talks.
See, the thing is about studying was that we wanted to study and we were completely ignorant as to what that meant. It wasn't like now where you have IOK, you have CIU, you have all these people who have come back. I mean, in Southern California, we have over 20 people from Southern California who went and studied and came back. So you have a lot of people you can talk to, so on and so. It wasn't like that at all. It was like, oh, so-and-so knows so-and-so who knows so-and-so who studied in this place. Yalla bismillah. Like, it's not, there's no smartphones, there's no internet, there's no, like, we had dial-up internet when we landed in Egypt, you know?
Yeah.
So we didn't have any idea what we were talking about. And then you go there and you kind of like get to be part of this culture of seeking knowledge, which is a culture that has existed and continues to exist from the days of the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it's very particular, you know. So it's all about like learning and getting knowledge and teaching and respecting the turath and respecting the ulama and all this kind of stuff. And then you come back and you're like, oh, I forgot. That's not the world we live in.
Right.
So yeah, I came back with the intention of teaching and doing all these things and so on. But most importantly, I came back with the intention of trying to figure out how to survive. Because now when we came back, I was, how old was I? I think I was like 29-ish, 28, 29, something around there.
So you studied for 7 years?
We studied from 2005 to 2012 technically, but we were in Egypt until 2011. So
Okay.
6-7 years, I guess you could say. Most important, I was just like, how do I survive? I'm 28, 29 years old. I have a wife. I have no savings. I have no job. I have no professional experience. I have nothing, basically, right? So that was the big issue.
When you were in Egypt, can you tell us a little bit more about like your experiences there, how it was different from the American life?
How Cairo is different than American life? I don't
Yeah.
think anyone who hasn't lived overseas can even begin to understand. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. We came to a place, we didn't speak the language. Took a long time to develop the language, to develop some sort of comfort in the place. Probably about 5 years, really, to get really kind of settled.
Was it fun though? Like when you guys landed there, and was it kind of like an adventure, or was it just stressful?
We were excited, you know, we wanted to study. Again, we didn't know what that meant, right? So most people are not accustomed to sitting in front of the same subject for 8 to 10 hours a day for 9 months. It's just most people are not accustomed to that, right? So you get the picture really quickly, like all of the tricks I've used to do well in school and academics and all this kind of stuff all my life, they don't really work here because there's no tricks. There's me and my wife and the teacher, and there's 5 hours of class time. And if you spent 3 to 5 hours on homework, it's going to show. And if you didn't, it's going to show. And it's really that simple, day in and day out for 9 months. Food is different, life is different, language is different, culture is different. You don't understand anything. We realized that we're living our Islam on training wheels, that we were completely dependent on everyone else to even just get by as believers, that we needed the halaqas and we needed the khatiras and we needed the khutbahs and we needed the community and we needed all these things that we had no idea how to actually just have our own Islam. So that was painful. It's like taking the training wheels off a bike. You fall over and over and over again until you learn how to ride, you know. And so we went through that. It was we'd only been married for a year, right? So now you've only been married for a year and you're moving to this place and you're on like a crazy budget. And that was definitely challenging. Cairo, but that first year, really, I don't know if many people realize it. The first year when you're studying Arabic is the dream year, in the sense that you're studying Arabic at a center that's designed to teach foreigners Arabic, and you usually live down the street, and they pretty much help you with everything, and like whatever, life is good, you know. You just wake up, I mean, what are you doing? You wake up, you eat some breakfast, you walk down the street, you go to class, you have a good time, you walk home, you do homework. I mean, that's about as good as life can get, right? And so that's great. But then when you get out of the Arabic Center and you actually apply to be part of Azhar, now you're in the ocean with all the other fish. right? Now you're in the Egyptian system. You're not in a system designed for foreigners anymore. So it's just a mess.
So you guys were able to pick up Arabic in 1 year then?
We did 9 months. And then we came back and we lived in the U.S. for about 9 months after that. Just I worked in like pizza delivery. I worked in different things to make some money, and then we were trying to figure out what we were going to do. And then alhamdulillah, we got a scholarship to go back. So we went back, and then we did Arabic again for about another like 8 to 9 months before we took the Azhar entrance exams. Yeah.
And then once you were in Azhar, you committed that you're going to finish this entire program. There wasn't anything like, oh, I want to go to another country and study there.
No, I don't know if you've heard me talk about that before, because
No,
it's
I
funny
haven't.
you asked that. Every year we wanted to leave Egypt. Every single year we made istikhara, like, yeah, Allah, should we leave this place? Is it good for us? If it's good for us, make it clear to us. And every year we felt like we should stay. When we first went back after Arabic, we were actually intending to go to France, where Imam Mustafa Omar was. And we visited there on our way back to Cairo, and we spent a day with him and so on and so forth. And then our plan was to go back to Cairo, do more Arabic, and then go there in the fall. And in the period in between, we decided to stay in Cairo. And then every year that we were in Azhar, we wanted to leave, basically. We thought about going to Qatar, we thought about going to different places, but in the end we ended up
No, what do you think about that? Because like I know Imam Mustafa Omar, he's been to many different places. The main place that he went to was France, but before that he went to like Jordan, he went to Egypt too.
He went to Nadwa in India.
Yeah. So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is you spend all your time in one place. Like some of the shuyukh at IOK, they went to Pakistan and they stayed there for 7 years. They did the entire program. Which one do you think is better for when you come back? Because when you come back, you're going to deal with people who are from Pakistan, people who are Arab, and you have to be able to understand how they interpret Islam.
Well, those are two different questions, I think, or two different angles on the question. I think that the best thing anyone can do is to try to turn over their affairs to Allah and see where it takes them. We don't really know what's best for us. I'm very grateful that what happened with us happened with us. I wouldn't. I'm just very grateful for that, to be able to say that I studied in Azhar and to be from the legacy of people who are Azhari, and to try to not betray that, and to be able to have experienced what we experienced there. I think for people who want to be relevant and serve the community and so on and so forth, that's, the studies are really only one segment of that. What you do in class is just giving you the keys to do everything else. So, it's not really, someone who wants to be relevant and serve the community, that's something that's going to occupy their perspective and influence how they do things and how they think about things and the conversations they have and what they do in the summer when they go home and things like that, And I think that can be done regardless of where you go. The thing that I like about Cairo in particular, especially when we were there, the government's being a little bit more dictatorial in some ways than it even was back then. But at least when we were there, it was total free-for-all on ideas. Every segment of the Muslim community you find. You'll find the Salafis and the Madhabis and the Ijtihadis and like the Sufis and all of the different branches of every single one of those, and you'll find the Ikhwanis, and all of the books are there. You can go to any of the bookstores and read all of the books, and it's mashallah, it was awesome in that way. And Cairo is just a really real city, we'll put it that way. It's a really real city, It's like 20 million people. Most of them are poor. A lot of history. It's just an amazing place. A lot of history, and I mean, the thing about Egypt you have to think about is that Al-Azhar has been consistently running in Egypt as a Sunni school from the time of just after Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, rahimahullah. And it's only one of many, many, many schools in Cairo. Just Cairo. We're not even talking about the other. Like, you're talking about on any given day, probably in certain periods, in one morning, you could probably find like hundreds of classes on grammar alone. right? So the way this is kind of like seeped into the culture of the people, even though there's like modernism, there's all kinds of problems and poverty has its issues and stuff, but there's things that are there that they're still there. Like this lecture that I was listening to this morning that I was showing you, in the course of the lecture it was on Aqidah, and he brought up 2 different proverbs that the just general Egyptians use. And he's like, now you understand where that proverb comes from. This is a principle in Aqidah. But because the shuyukh and like because these institutions have been there for so long, it's like they're in the blood of the people, you know? So it's a different experience in that way. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of problems. We always tell people living in Cairo is like being in an abusive relationship. You know, the person tells you they love you, and then they turn around and hit you. And then you go to leave, and they're like, no, but I really love you. I'm going to change. It's going to be better this time. And they make all these promises, and then you have like a couple of good days, and then you get beat up again. Like that's literally what living in Cairo is like.
What's a day in the life like for someone who's thinking about going overseas to study there? What's a true day in the life like over there?
It depends. It depends on what the person's doing. So, without giving away too many secrets, you know, there's formal education and there's informal education and there's non-formal education, right? In the sense that informal is like we're sitting here having a conversation and maybe I learned something from Arham, and then, you know, that's informal. Or you're walking down the street and someone tells you something. And then there's formal, which is like in the school. And there's non-formal, which is kind of formal, but it's not authorized, so to speak, like in a systematic way. Well, I guess that's not exactly correct either. It's not institutionalized in the same way. So the understanding with the students in Al-Azhar is that this tradition of learning that is represented by this institution is much larger than the walls of this institution. So as just a precursor to what I'm going to say. So, you know, going to class is only, I think I can legitimately say that at least for the college I was in, the vast majority of serious students spent very little time going to their classes. And that's because the university class is taught by sometimes someone amazing, sometimes someone not, and always with 300 other people in the class, most of whom are there just because they failed to get into any different school, not because they actually care to study Sharia, right? So they failed to get into engineering, they failed to get into medicine. This is general college now, right? Azhar is a public institution, it's a public university, it's free for Egyptians. You go into which college you want to go into based on how good you do in high school, right? So if you don't go into engineering and medicine and everything else, then you go to the Islamic studies colleges. So you have a lot of people who can't actually understand really the stuff in the way that it needs to be understood. So serious students, like some of them, they'll go to some classes, they'll not go to other classes, and then they'll make sure that they try to spend time with the people of knowledge outside of the walls of the university. And that still remains up to today. So up to today, you have the Madyafa of Shaykh Mustafa Ismail al-Adawi, which is right across from the College of Al-Azhar in the old part of the city. And the Madyafa tradition is a beautiful tradition in Egypt that I wish we had here, maybe one day, inshallah. Madyafa is like the place where the sheikh shows hospitality to people. So basically it's called that because the sheikh will teach there, and anytime the students come, they feed them. So they give them spiritual nourishment, they give them physical nourishment. So up to today, when you go to a class there, a guy comes out with a huge tray with like 50 cups of tea, and everyone in the class gets a cup of tea and a biscuit, right? To keep this like tradition alive. So you have this madyafa. That madyafa literally every day has 2 to 3 of the top ulama in the country teaching different Islamic studies subjects every day. Then you have the madyafa or the zawiya of Shaykh al-Dardir, Abu al-Barakat, Allah yarhamu, also is going to have classes all the time. You have the actual masjid of Al-Azhar that has 2 to 3 classes a day. So like all around the city, all of the ulama are teaching, and there's literally like thousands of ulama in Cairo without exaggeration, as long as they're not being imprisoned. But you know, there's people around. They're hard to find. Our teachers used to say that Al-Qahira kunuzuha makhfiya, that Cairo, the treasures of Cairo are hidden. You have to really look for them. They're hard to find, and it exhausts you trying to find them. But those classes will be around. Like you'll have someone like Sheikh Ahmed Taha Rayan, Hafidhullah, who's the top Maliki scholar in Egypt, and he's taught comparative fiqh in like every major university, Islamic university in the world. And he'll teach in Azhar. He taught us in Azhar one of the years in comparative fiqh. Then he'll teach in the Madyafa of Sheikh Mustafa Ismail and al-Adawi right across the street. And then in his actual home in this like grimy area of Cairo that the Egyptians were shocked that we even go to, he has a little musalla in the bottom of the building that he lives in, that he teaches in. So you find the people, and they're all around the city. So every day is different. But essentially, a person will wake up and they'll do what everyone else does: wake up, eat breakfast, and figure out what that day is going to look like. Most people do like some sort of memorization of Quran in the morning, right? And then they'll go about their day, and depending on where the classes is and the public transit and all that kind of stuff, you just have to figure it out. But there's so much there. It really is, subhanAllah. It's just finding it is hard, and getting to it is hard, because transportation in Egypt is really exhausting. And the pollution is so bad. So generally, if you go out and you take a few buses and a taxi and you get to a class, and you kind of like need to take a nap when you go home, because it beats you up. But basically, you just spend all of your waking hours studying. I mean, I can legitimately say that I think that most of the students that we knew there, they just spend all of their waking hours studying. And this is before, again, internet. Nobody was on social media when we were there. Nobody was on social media. Nobody was really on the internet much. Everyone was studying. And the Western students, we would get together once a week. We'd get together on Thursday nights for dinner. Everyone would just go out somewhere. But that was it. Other than that, everyone's just studying. Yeah. And the other thing about Cairo is that you can't escape reality in Cairo, which is hard. You don't get that like intense spiritual environment or whatever. But it's also kind of like, if you can survive with your iman intact in that place, you're pretty good. And if you can be like a strong movement in that environment, you're like waliullah, khalas, and it's done. Because Cairo is rough. It's really rough. But it's good, because you don't escape reality. And Cairo is really a major center of all kinds of ideas, not just in Islam. The reason why it's so diverse in Islam is because it's so diverse, period. Just in modern thought and ideas. And, it's an important city.
I was reading somewhere that a lot of the philosophers of the past, like for example Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, people from that tradition, they would migrate to Egypt to study. And that's where the center of knowledge was.
Yeah, probably Alexandria.
Yeah.
Yeah, Alexandria was huge in those days. It still is.